Didn't finish the question before, but it relates to what we're doing, so I'll just finish this question on the horse first, and then we will go into our theories of evolution, Darwin and Lamarck. I've kept the evolution here in terms of the horse because it's the most commonly asked question in terms of evolution where an animal is concerned, the horse. I'm not really sure why.
I hope that people are paying attention at home.
Oh yes, because this often comes up. So it says the diagram below represents the evolution of the horse compiled from fossil records. And I need to go here, and we can see, because this is put into two separate slides, that we can originally see, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the horse, our first ancestral horses are very, very small. You can see that's about 0.4 meters high. And if you look at its toes over here, you can see that it still has 1, 2, 3, 4 toes. The top one is enlarged a little bit, but they are 4 toes. Now, the reason why they say that the horse looked like this, was small and had these sort of toed kind of feet, was because it is said that the horse began to evolve in a marshland, and therefore being lighter and smaller with toes that enable you to walk kind of on the marshland, whereas a hoof you'd stick, would be like standing in a stiletto in mud, and it would not benefit the horse at all. So therefore, we can see that as we progressively move up, we're going up this way, as we can see from our arrow. And as we go to the next one, we can progressively see that as we move up, the legs got longer. We can see that our horse got much bigger and taller. We can also see that we had the disintegration of the other toes. The other toes, the ones that were on the side, slowly disappeared or dissipated. And the one large big front toe over there got particularly large and became ultimately the hoof. Okay, so now let's look at our questions in relation to this. How many times is the modern horse taller than its earliest ancestor? So if I come over here, I can see that the earliest ancestor of my horse was about 0.4 meters tall, whereas if I go up here, I can see, okay, whereas if I look at this particular one over here, I can see that my horse is now 1.6 meters. So from the beginning, the ancestral horse was about 0.4. As we progress upwards, it's gone up to about 1.6.
So that's subtraction right there.
Well, in this case, it'll actually be division. Because it was 0.4, now it's 1.6.
Oh, it's how many times is it bigger?
Correct.
Okay,
so
okay.
1.6 divided by 0.4 is going to give us 4 times. Always put in your unit. Don't just put 4. The horse is 4 times bigger from its ancestral species.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Next question. What happened to the appearance of the feet of the horse over time? As I mentioned to you just now, we saw that there was a disintegration of the toes on the outside, and the middle one, the middle toe, enlarged to ultimately become the hoof that we see in the modern horse today. Paleontologists, now remember, paleontologists are the people who look at the bones and try and determine evolutionary trends. That's what a paleontologist does. Studies the anatomy of the bones and then determines what is related as a species and what is potentially unrelated as a species. So paleontologists suggest that the ancient horse lived in forests, but modern horses lived in open grassland. Explain one way in which the modern horse is adapted to open grassland. Now, what I just want to do before I even answer that question, do you see it says here, explain one way? Remember that if it says one way or one example or 2, whatever, only the first one will be marked. Okay. So don't put down 5 that you're guessing and then hope that somewhere in those 5, the bottom one might be right. They will only mark the first one because it says only give 1. So please be careful of that and don't just write a whole list down and hope that there are some that are going to be right. So explain one way in which the modern horse is adapted to open grassland. Well, of course, we know our modern horse we see is very, very tall. It can see above the grassland and therefore see for predators and this sort of thing. Also, the long, strong legs make it very, very strong and easy able to run on open grassland. And the big toe, the hoof, is also adapted, as opposed to the toes, spread out toes we had before, which were adapted to marshland.
Okay.
Okay, now we come to, of course, our theories of evolution. Now, there are 2 theories of evolution that you must be familiar with. Lamarck and, of course, Darwin. Now, what Lamarck said was that the usage of an organ will determine its evolutionary pathway. So, for example, if I continually use this arm and I don't use this arm of mine will potentially become a lot more developed than this arm. That is true. However, he said that that physiological trait in my body will be passed to my genes and passed on to future generations, basically.
Okay.
Okay? So he said that a physiological change in your body can cause a change in your genetics, and therefore you will make children, or your offspring will also have that particular change.
It doesn't sound quite right, though, when I think about it.
No, it doesn't, because if you think of examples like with the, is it the vendor woman who've got the very long necks with all their, you know, all the bangles and things over here.
Yes.
That would basically mean that if she had stretched her neck on account of the fact that she had all those bangles, that she would have a change in her genetics, and her offspring would now all be born with these long necks.
Can you imagine how long our necks would have been?
Correct, correct. We'd all be very, very disproportionate by now. So, of course, we know that that was not the case. Whereas, on the other hand, Darwin said that as an environment changed, you didn't have suddenly a mutation that enabled you to adapt to your environment. Darwin said that you already had those genes inside your body, but they were not selected for. And that when that environment changed, these genes became expressed, and those that had that gene, those genes, or genes, would survive. Because they survived, they would breed, and therefore that particular trait would continue into future generations. Whereas those that didn't have the gene would not survive, and therefore they would be selected against, not breed, and therefore they would die out in the population.
Okay, it's logical.
Yes. So this is the biggest one that, again, also comes up in many of the papers, is, of course, our evolution with the giraffe. So let's see what we have over here. Here's our ancestral giraffe and our modern giraffe. And the one thing we can see is the neck has got very much longer in the modern giraffe. So, question 2.1. Tens of thousands of years ago, the animals that evolved into giraffes were not as tall as the modern giraffes. Over a long period of time, the necks of the giraffes became longer. They could reach leaves high in the trees and reach down for water. And there's our diagram that we have over there. Clearly, our modern giraffe, we can see with its oopsie daisy, with its much longer neck. Let me rather show you over here.
Legs.
Much longer neck, longer legs, etc. And one thing that we can see is that giraffe is therefore able to reach the higher vegetation over there. So if we come to our questions, 2.1.1, it says describe how the long necks of modern giraffes would have been explained by the following: Darwin and Lamarck. I'm actually going to start with Lamarck. Lamarck would have said that as the giraffe was stretching its neck, the neck got longer. And because these giraffes were reaching for higher vegetation and their necks got longer, that caused a change in their chromosomes that got passed on in their offspring. We know that that's not the case. On the other hand, Darwin would have said that as the vegetation was getting taller, giraffes that already had longer necks were now able to reach the food better.
And so the other ones, because of starvation, died eventually.
Exactly. And therefore, because these giraffes were able to reach the higher food, the taller giraffes survived. The ones with the shorter necks could not survive because they could not feed. And therefore, over time, we see that the neck got longer and longer. We see this with ourselves. Very often, if you have two tall human parents, put the two together and we get a very tall offspring, some of the children. We strengthen that gene down the line.
Okay.
We'll be back with you in a moment.